So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, Hemant. My name is Kerry Hallard and I'm the Chief Exec of the Global Sourcing Association. So we're the industry body focused on bringing the buyers and service providers of technology and business services together so they can do more business and to do that business better. So we have been going. This year is our 35th anniversary. So we've been doing what we do for a really, really long time. And I'm really excited to be bringing the subject of ESG to our community today. So I think we've built together a really phenomenal program today and portfolio of speakers. So the running order for today is I'm just going to do the introduction and give an overview of why we've put this event on and what we're trying to achieve. I'm then going to hand over to Hemant Pukli, who's the Managing Director of Neo Group, and I'll explain the relationship with Neo Group in a second. And then we're going into a very interactive panel discussion, which I'll be chairing. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Marcia Beliciano, who is Head of ESG Corporate Responsibility and an absolutely guru on all things in this subject from RELX. So thanks for joining us, Marcia. And then also absolutely delighted to be joined by another guru. So Becky Klissman is the Managing Director from the Chancery Lane project. And I'll let Becky explain the Chancery Lane project and the fantastic work that they're absolutely and fundamental work they're absolutely doing there in as we come to the panel, if that's okay. So by way of backdrop, what we're hoping to achieve today is a fully interactive. So please do put digital hands up or ideally put questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and trying to get you all as involved as possible. But yes, please do keep videos off if you can so that we can actually focus on the panel speakers. So what we as an industry association have noticed over the last, nearly 2 years, but certainly the last year or so, is that all of our enterprise buyer members are trying to understand the sustainability of the service providers that they're actually working with. Each and every one of our members is spending ages doing desk research to come to a good questionnaire set that they can then provide to their service providers to understand all things ESG within their supply chain, but specifically for us, their service provider community. Simultaneously, we're finding that each and every one of our service provider members feel like they're being absolutely overwhelmed with questionnaires coming from all of their clients. But each and every one of those questionnaires is written differently, asking different questions, measuring things differently with different metrics. So there's a whole world of sort of noise going on out there. There's a lot of confusion going on out there, and it seems to be a lot of duplication of effort. Now, we as an industry association are really, really focused on sharing the best practices and moving towards a strong movement of standardization. So we think there's no point reinventing wheels. We can work together and actually have one common question set that we believe our enterprise buyers can present to all of their service providers. So that's the backdrop. In our discussions and in our research, we came across the work of Neo Group. So Neo had already started doing a degree of research amongst the sustainability of their service providers. And we thought, again, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's actually collaborate, which is what our industry is all about, collaboration. Let's collaborate with Neo as a partner and build on what they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hemant at Neo to explain the work that they've been doing and their findings so far. Then I'll talk you through the work that GSA has done to build on that, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. So over to you, Hemant.
Thank you, Kerry, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are, and welcome. It's an honor to be here. And I'll just share my screen here and get started with my deck. This is a very brief and edited version of a much longer deck, and I just wanted to stick to the main points, main messages for today. Please feel free to jump in with your questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. So our survey, I'm trying to get this into full screen. Yeah. So just to give you a perspective on ESG adoption and the survey and all of that, from a near group perspective, we basically see this as a the business ecosystem as a whole. Sometime back, and old timers from the technology industry would probably remember this. There used to be a computer company called Sun, Stanford University Network, whose slogan was, "The network is the computer." So our view of the future, as we evolve, businesses evolve and find themselves in a sustainable future, is that the ecosystem is the business, in a manner of speaking. It cannot operate in a vacuum. Businesses have to essentially network with all the entities that they transact with, and they hold a stake in, and who hold a stake in them. It's important to set this perspective because a lot of how we went about surveying the ESG adoption has to do with how we look at this whole slice of the market. So word or two about the survey. We have been as part of our regular business, we are in touch with many companies. Quite often our clients call us to run RFPs and such like on their behalf. And we have relationships with the supply side, though we don't provide any services on that side, or we exclusively serve buy-side clients. But our clients had been asking us over a period of time, as a matter of routine conversation, what do we see on the supply side? Are vendors really serious? Are they, do they mean what they say and say what they do and do what they say, and so on? So we thought that it's a good idea to actually put together a bunch of questions and go out into the marketplace and actually find out for ourselves what vendors are doing and ask them to speak about their own ESG and sustainability programs. So we reached out in no specific order or choice. We reached out to some of the top tier vendors that we have regularly been in contact with. ITBSP is an acronym for Information Technology and Business Service Providers. And these were the ones that we approached for the survey. A fairly good cross-section, I would say, and we have a good sense of what the leading providers in the market are doing as a result of it. So while we conducted this survey, we were particularly mindful of something called the watermelon effect, which many of you in the sourcing industry and in general users of technology and business services are probably aware of. You have a status report that comes to you which says everything is green, but if you dig deeper down, turns out that a few things are red. So what are you measuring? How are you measuring it? And does it actually reflect the state of whatever it is that you're trying to get at? In the case of SLAs, it would be the customer is dissatisfied somehow, all the SLAs are green. And in the case of ESG, we thought a similar thing might be in play here. And a lot of companies might just be looking at, okay, what do we need to comply with? Let's just go do it. And not really fully embracing the philosophy and imbibing it and letting it percolate into their culture and their attitude towards the stakeholders, which, again, as I referred to in the earlier slide, it's a complex network of many different entities. So the survey that we designed actually had two dimensions to it. One set of criteria pertained to what we're calling the operational performative alignment. That's how well is the organization aligned towards operational and performative characteristics, which again are broken up under E, S, and G buckets. And this is indicative of the kind of things that we were looking at. I won't go into too much detail here because time is limited. The other dimension, so this is, if you like, the x-axis, and the other dimension is the cultural and attitudinal alignment. And the criteria here, and we treated ourselves as stakeholders because we represent customers of all the organizations that we listed. We have at some point or the other run RFPs and invited them on behalf of the customer. So we are kind of like a representative of the customer. So we said, let's consider ourselves as a test case and see how these organizations respond to us and this survey. And these are the criteria we came up with to score their cultural and attitudinal alignment. So that takes me to what the survey threw up. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the top tier IT and business service providers are mature. They have integrated sustainability and sustainability thinking into what they're doing now and how they see the future. Some of them are performing much better on the operational and performative criteria, and some are performing better on the cultural and attitudinal criteria. But it's really a question of time when most of them would move towards excellence in both areas. So that's the indications that we got from the surveys. Important notes are that many of them, in fact, almost all of them, consider this to be an area of competitive advantage. The more demonstrable effects that they can show on their alignment with ESG and various reporting standards and guidelines, the more they believe they are able to attract customers and investment as well. So according to NEO, the roadmap for the transformation journey looks something like this. To begin with, we had the traditional profit-oriented business, where which basically followed the Friedman doctrine, which you can look it up. There was an article written by Friedman in the New York Times of September 1970, saying that there is no such thing as a social responsibility for a corporation. Their only job is to make profit. So that's where we came from back in the 70s, in the previous century. And the journey has been towards a sustainable enterprise. And where we are today, in terms of the survey that we conducted, is that most of the organizations are here. They have crossed certain milestones here by way of green initiatives, CSR, and corporate governance, and they're moving towards a purpose-driven, stakeholder value as opposed to shareholder value focused, positive sum partnerships with ethical and self-regulatory culture built into the organization, as opposed to being bolted on top of it. I'll just briefly pause for any questions, comments.
No, Hemant, you're not actually on full screen. It might be easier to read if you had it on full screen.
Yeah, for some reason it's we're clicking the. Okay, there you go.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. I clicked it a couple of times earlier, but it just wasn't expanding. But PowerPoint tends to misbehave when you're on Teams somehow. Anyway, so some of our interesting notes from the survey were that these was essentially what we focused on. What kind of executive sponsorship exists in the participants' organizations? Is it really supported? What is the tone at the top? In most cases, we found that it was a fairly strong support for ESG, and some of the larger ones actually have a legacy and a history of social responsibility as part of their culture, from the industry groups that they have been part of. If you look at the names, you'll know which ones. And so there has been a history of social responsibility and looking at the business as part of a larger whole, as part of a system where it's important to lift all boats, so to speak. In terms of organization, and this was another thing that we look for in our survey. Most of the IT BSPs we surveyed were federated. They ran their ESG programs from the top. They had a C-level person, and it was a very light and agile team which was dedicated to this. Very few full-time dedicated resources, but a lot of co-opted partners from each operational area, as you would expect, because this pretty much touches almost every facet of the organization. In a few cases, we found that there wasn't that much centralization or federation. There were different leaders pursuing different dimensions under E, S, and G domains. And there was some coordination, but not it wasn't a centralized approach. That does raise some matters for concern, because sometimes an environmental goal may be in direct contradiction with, if not competing with, a social goal. And if these two aren't well coordinated and well synchronized, there could be fault lines in the organization's ESG strategy, and that may lead to problems later on. But be that as it may, I guess over time, organizations will evolve to find the right balance between centralized, decentralized, and federated. We did ask a few questions about spend. Didn't get too many encouraging responses, but it was broadly understood that between 2 to 3% of their profits was what the IT BSPs we surveyed, that seemed to be the general trend, which was basically the budget for ESG, with the social part being actually the more prominent share in the pie chart.
Just coming up to 10 minutes now, Hemant.
Yep. So let me then just jump to the money slide, which is basically this one. So this plots the operational performative alignment on the x-axis and the cultural and attitudinal alignment on the y-axis. And you can see the vendors in the respective quadrants here. On the top right, you have Hexaware, HCL, and TCS. On the bottom right, you have Infosys, Atos, Capgemini. In the top left, there's Cognizant, Emphasis, and Zensar, and the rest are scattered somewhere in the continuum. This band here, going from northwest to southeast, if you like, is essentially the those who are, excuse me, moving towards a leadership position. This quadrant here is represents organizations that are already there and looking to do better. So that is the what came out of our survey eventually after we did all the scoring and the rankings. Happy to answer any questions or listen to any comments.
Thanks for that, Hemant. I suggest we take all the questions and comments for the panel, if that's all right. So thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right. Thanks, Matt. Right, I'm going to now move on to sharing my slides. So Abby, please let me know when they are visible.
Yeah, we've got them.
And are they in full screen? Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah. Okay, right. So I've already explained a little bit of the backdrop of what we were trying to achieve. So basically, it was very much the backdrop that all of our buyers were struggling with this, and all of our service providers were being inundated with different questionnaires, and also being asked for all sorts of different accreditations. So our aim was to, and still is, to develop one standard questionnaire using one common data set, and then moving hopefully to one set response that the GSA becomes a repository or holder of. And we're doing this, one, obviously to share best practice, but much more so that if we improve the practice, if we improve the understanding, then we'll absolutely achieve greater adoption of all things ESG and move to a much more sustainable future. So we are about to publish, and I do apologise, we have been about to publish for some time, and I think I'm suffering a little bit from, Pareto's law that we're 80% of the way there, and perhaps we should stick with that 80%, but I keep fine-tuning and finding additional things to put on in. But it is my commitment that I will stop fine-tuning and tweaking and get it out for consultation very soon. So in our best practice guide, we have set out, it's quite a long guide, but we've set out, setting the scene, set out our objectives, and then we've started including an entire glossary of terms to create better understanding and definitions for the industry to use. We have given an overview of all the different bodies that are out there and the different accreditations that are at play, and we are growing the guidelines, the principles of best practice, the tools and the technology. We have now got to the point that we have got a question set for organisational alignment. And we've also got a question set to assess the performance of our service providers. And we are also including within this guide the GSA's own Service Provider Code of Conduct, which has been ratified across our community. There are a section on FAQs with a little bit of a how-to guide, how to use this guide and how to use the surveys. And then, of course, we've got the next steps, because this is going to be an ever-evolving initiative. So just to give extracts so you can know what to expect, our glossary of terms are going to be really, really broad across all things E, S and G. I don't expect anybody to read this. I'm just going to give you an overview so you know what's kind of in there. Looking at the different bodies, we are including an overview of, this is just a few of them. There are many, many more bodies out there. And we'll be given a top level view of what those bodies are and what they're set out to achieve, and links through to their websites. Then we're going to give an overview of the different accreditations, and they again are very broad, from the work of EcoVadis through to the work of We Connect, which is accrediting women-owned businesses for supplier diversity, and MSD UK being for ethnic minority-owned businesses, through to all the different sort of ISO standards that are relevant to ESG. So again, this is just a small example of some of the accrediting bodies and the accreditations that are available, and some of the qualifications that are available for individuals themselves to take. So this best practice guide is going to earmark all of these and give a brief overview, and in time we hope to actually have more information and feedback on the value that these bring from the membership community. So we want this best practice guide to become very much a living and breathing thing that actually has comments and contribution and case studies included to not just highlight what's available, but to really demonstrate the value that getting involved in some of these initiatives deliver. Or not, as the case may be. Not all of these are really, really relevant for the service provider community as much as they are for different vertical sectors or manufacturing, for example. And then all sorts of different guidelines, questionnaires, best practice guides, different tools, different technologies. Again, it's going to be a growing base of information that's all included in one central place, making it so much easier. Now, this is all the backdrop that we are publishing within the guide, but then we've done the heavy lifting, I think, for the membership community, and actually poured out what we think is going to be the right sort of approach to assessing service provider sustainability performance. So we, obviously partnering with NEO Group, are really going to be following a lot of the work that they've already done with their questionnaire. So we are proposing two different sets of questions. One is a set of questions which looks at the organisational alignment to ESG, and there are some generic questions. There's questions across stakeholders, and there's questions within the supply chain, and these are open-ended questions that enable an organisation to really sort of present its approach, present its individuality, to give itself that opportunity of real competitive advantage, and in showing that it's not just compliant, it is actually embedded in the philosophy of the organisation. So this is a little bit more, some of it would be attitudinal, a lot of it is organisational alignment, it's a little bit softer, and an open questionnaire across all of these sort of subjects. Then we've got the assessment questionnaire, which is broken down into the three sections of environmental, social and governance, obviously. And with us, because we're really looking at the service provider community, you know, we've got a slightly different focus in our questionnaire set. So I think we've probably got more questions than you'd probably expect on average in the social area, because we see that as being an incredibly important part of service provision. So there's a lot more on people, there's a lot more on supplier diversity, inclusion and diversity, gender pay gap information, than there is on, you know, the focus on how are you handling hazardous waste, for example. So we have got a bias that works more for a service provider than just any company, but absolutely this can be used for any company to make it standard and easy for organisations to adopt. And then we are proposing a marking criteria. As you can see, we're looking at a five-point scale, where, you know, organisations are being invited to basically self-assess and be quite honest as to where they actually are in their journey against this entire question set. So 0 being, yeah, we're not really on board with any of this yet, to 4 being, yeah, we have been doing this and it is in a steady state. So but again, we are open to discussion. This is all in a draft format at the moment. So that's our proposed approach, is, as I said, self-assessment for organisations to fill in where they believe they're at, but then also the more organisational alignment piece that gives the buyer the opportunity to assess that it is actually a philosophy rather than just compliance, and to double check that really the self-assessment scores are really more robust, if you know what I mean. We are suggesting that there would be a degree of routing to this questionnaire for different types of organisations, and certainly for those organisations tailored by size and by importance. And we will be moving towards how this can all be evidenced. So we are suggesting that where there is evidence, that evidence be posted against these questionnaires. You know, that's obviously going to be growing significantly over time. So where we're at now is we've got this in a much more detailed format available, and we're inviting everybody to get involved in the consultation process. So if you can send an email to admin@gsa-uk.com if you want to get involved in the consultation, if you want to give feedback on any aspect of it. So whether it's feedback on the glossary of terms, whether it's feedback on the overall approach and you don't agree with it, then, you know, we're really open to that. If it's feedback on the way that we're suggesting that you self-assess and market, or if it's actually the questions themselves need more fine-tuning or reducing or expanding, then, you know, we really do want to hear from everybody so that we can actually publish this as an industry approved standard approach. So obviously next steps are going to be following the consultation to actually publish this as a full best practice guide and questionnaire for everybody to use. Our ideal is that the GSA becomes the central repository for all of these responses. So it makes it much less of a burden on all of the service providers and much less of a burden on the enterprise buyers, that they can actually go to one place for a view on different service providers' sustainability. And of course, this is going to be evolving. There'll be much more inclusion on different tools, different bodies, different accreditations that are being developed and launched, and they are being developed and launched at the moment on a virtually daily basis. And then we're going to be asking organisations, like we're going to be asking RELX in a moment, to share their stories of what they've done and what's worked for them and the challenges they've faced to bring this best practice to life. And then the jury's out as to whether we actually then move this on to being an actual index. I know Hemant presented, you know, a quadrant of performance. We're wondering whether there's room or a requirement to actually move the self-assessment and the questionnaires into a index. And this would never ever be a name and shame index. It would absolutely be an index for each service provider to understand how they're performing against their peers, so that those that are performing at the best can share their best practices, and those that are performing least well can learn from the better performers and improve, and therefore increase the overall performance of sustainability and all things ESG across the service provider community. So that's a whistle stop, because obviously we don't have a great deal of time, but happy to take any questions that come into the chat. Right, I'm just going to close that out if I can. Sharing. Which I hopefully have done now. And now I would like to invite panelists to come and join me. So if Becky, thank you, Becky, and Marcia could join, that would be fabulous. Right, okay, so obviously, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining me, and it would be great in the first instance if we could get a brief introduction from you both. So Marcia, I'd like to go to you first, if I may. I know the storyboard relics a little bit, and I certainly see you guys as being really, really mature organisations in terms of where you are on your ESG journey. And I just wondered if you could actually give us a top level overview of your journey so far, where you're at. That would be great.
Thank you very much, Kerry, and it's great to join both Becky and Hemant today. Well, I think journey is really the critical word here, because we don't have all the answers. We're learning year on year. And in fact, I mean, the kind of organization that Relics is, for those that don't know, our company, we're a business that is comprised of 4 operating units, including LexisNexis Risk Solution, which is looking at how to fight fraud, for example, or provide data services to particular industries like Cerium, which serves the global aviation industry. We also have Elsevier, which is the world's largest scientific information provider. We are also LexisNexis Legal and Professional, where we are cataloging the world's laws, and we are also a news aggregator. And then we have RX, which is one of the world's largest events businesses. So there isn't an industry that we don't probably have a product, service, or tool for. And my own role, I've been called many things in terms of my job title. And I'm fairly agnostic because I don't really, I'm very fascinated about the terminology, but at the end of the day, for me, this is about a business living up to its responsibilities that can help it be there for the long term. So we know, as Milton Friedman said, I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago, that, business is not charity. We do need to make a profit, but it's how we make that profit. And I think we've seen many instances of where businesses get this wrong, and they're not there for the long term, or they're there in a much more weakened form. I have the great honor of having been the person who has started this work at Relics. I mean, it is tapping into lots of best practice that always existed in the business, but I've been at this for over 15 years. So I know the path that we've been on, and I know where we're still trying to go, and there's still so much more to do, but it is really about looking at what is best practice. And that's constantly changing every year. What good looks like has changed from maybe the year before, the 5 years before, and it won't be what good looks like in another 5 years. So how do we address those gaps in our performance of where we want to get to? That's what I'm interested in. And I was mindful on the slides that Hemant showed about, where's the governance around this in terms of the E, S, and the G part. but it isn't owned by me and it's not owned by my team. It really has to be owned by the 33,000 people of RELX, even if they don't know and aren't as familiar with that terminology. It has to be tapping into that impulse to do the right thing, and to help our organization to be able to do that. So I think that's my whistle stop, Carrie.
No, that is absolutely great. And I'm going to come back to you and ask you a little bit about exactly, you know, the best practice tips that you'd be willing to share in a moment. But I think what you last said dovetails in brilliantly with the work of the Chancery Lane project. And, you know, from the conversation we had, Becky, you know, you very much agreed that this is the work of everybody. It has to be the work of everybody. So could you just give us an introduction for those that aren't familiar with the Chancery Lane project, what the Chancery Lane project is all about, and how it's the work of everyone?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So absolutely echoing what Marcia has just said, it is the work of everybody, and that I'm so delighted to be on a panel with somebody who thinks exactly the same way that we do at the Chancery Lane project. So the Chancery Lane project is a worldwide movement of lawyers and sustainability professionals and contracting professionals. And we believe that the power of contracts can be harnessed to deliver net zero targets. So we are essentially a delivery mechanism to make sure that the targets that an organisation sets flow through the entire organisation. So as Marcia said, it is everybody's job, not just a small group of people in the sustainability team. Those targets need to flow through an organisation, and the way that you can achieve that to ensure you have enforceable obligations is through contracts. Everyone knows contracts. We all operate and use them all the time. They are a tried and trusted mechanism, and they can deliver anything you want them to, but in this instance, they can deliver net zero targets. And essentially, that's what we believe. And we are a charity that makes available a number of climate clauses that are free to use, and you can literally pick them up, put them in your agreements, and you are already starting to embed your net zero targets within your organisation, because it's going into the DNA of your organisation, which is the contracts that you use. That's us in a nutshell. I think we should move on to the discussions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, you know, we're very like-minded in that, you know, we believe that we can standardize a lot of this stuff, and we can share the best practices across, you know, across the community to create better understanding and change. So, Marcia, based on the entire journey, and you said, you know, you've been doing this for 15 years, the entire journey that you've been on with RELX, you know, what would be your view on, you know, a more standardized approach for assessing the performance of organizations in your supply chain?
Well, I definitely welcome you were inviting feedback, and I know you're going to get ready to send out the document for consultation, but I think, you know, we're hungry for opportunities to get some type of consolidation, because the requests do come fast and furious, and they come to different people in the organization. I think that's something that we are trying to do a better job at, in terms of arming people so that they know what those answers are. But any type of way that we have to agree on standards and to collaborate, I think are good, because, as you say, it reduces that that the burden on responding to the various questionnaires. And I'm sympathetic. We want to, you know, we do that within our own supply chain. So we have something called our socially responsible supply chain program, where we identify a tracking list based on significant spend, based on businesses that are critical suppliers to us, and also suppliers that are located in high-risk locations. And so we are making sure that they are aware of our supplier code, that they sign up to it, that we are tracking their performance against our supplier code, that we are remediating effectively. But that a lot of that is around the stick. And we also have to deal with the carrot, you know, how, you know, our suppliers have challenges just like we do. You know, where is that sweet spot where we can help each other along the journey, and that's why I certainly am welcoming the work that the Chancery Lane project does, because you know, companies like my own and like those of you who are on the call today, we need to respond to things like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD. And one of the things that it asks us to do is to assess our climate risk in our supply chain. And of course, we all have to be moving to setting our net zero targets, not only in the stuff that we can more directly control, our scope 1 and 2 emissions, but also scope 3, which perhaps one of the largest portions of that are in our supply chain. And it can be hard enough to figure out what's happening in your supply chain, never mind trying to influence on their own reduction. So opportunities where we can work together at scale, it has to be the way to go, which also reduces the compliance burden on our suppliers, because they don't want to be responding like we don't to just hundreds of requests for information.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I mean, just building on that, Becky, standardization seems to be the way to go. What are the blockers that you're facing and experiencing? Why isn't it just a no-brainer that everybody would accept, these standard clauses and embed them?
Well, obviously, it's, you need to make sure that our messages are out there. So I very much welcome opportunities like this to tell a wide audience of people about what's available. But I also think sometimes, and I hate to say this about my profession, but they can be the blocker in the room. I'm a lawyer by training. I used to be an environmental lawyer. So normally environmental lawyers wouldn't necessarily be the blocker on environmental things, but I think it's true to say that there are pressures around, say, if you're on a big deal or something and there's tight timeframes, or there's a certain budget that the client has set, and then you try and throw in a few extra questions into a due diligence questionnaire, or the data room doesn't have something when you're on a sort of a transaction, and hey presto, it's like, oh well, that's too difficult to deal with right now. We have a deadline. Do you know what? We won't bother with that, and that can be a real temptation. So actually, the really important thing is to bake this stuff on early in the transaction, which is why, for example, we have clauses that look at things like non-disclosure agreements, heads of terms, so that you can get your climate ambition in at the start of your relationship that you're developing with another party, so to make sure that your targets will flow into that, and there will be requirements and obligations within that working relationship, that, for example, you collaborate on sharing data, you set joint targets, you do work together that implements climate abatement measures. So that's the important thing. It's getting up front, and that's why it's really important that sustainability professionals and also contracting professionals like procurement people really understand that our clauses are available. Then they can go and say to their lawyers, look, this is something we need to do because it delivers our targets, and we need you to make sure that that wording gets into our documents. And once you have that collaboration between client and lawyer and possibly in-house legal team, that's when you start seeing delivery. So it's not a no-brainer. I mean, of course, it's obvious when I say it, but actually it's not a no-brainer, because it's a slightly different way of working that we're all getting to grips with. So we don't want to beat anyone up. We just want to say, look, here's something that you can do to embed your net zero targets within your organization. And this is a tried and trusted method if you use contracts.
Right, so Neo and Hemant, you're based in India. Neo is American headquartered, I believe.
Yes.
And obviously, if you look at the service providers that you've assessed, they're all global companies. Some of them headquartered from India, some of them headquartered from the US. Are you familiar with the work of the Chancery Lane project in the US and India, or is there something similar? Or Becky, are you taking it out, and is it a global initiative? So I'll ask. I'll ask Hemant first.
Okay. Yeah, well, at the festival, I did attend a presentation, and I was struck by both the comprehensiveness and the vision of the Chancery Lane project, and the fact that they're here to help, without really trying to make too much money out of it. I think that's very much in line with the spirit of ESG, which is essentially it's our planet, right? We all of us need to help each other in doing the best we can. So I'm totally on board, and I promised to come back to them when I knew what I wanted from them, which I could integrate into some of the work that we do with our clients. But I think I'm getting a fairly good idea now that essentially it's the contracting piece that we need to look at. There could be subtle variations between US and UK law, but it's basically common law. So I think that should be a smaller problem to solve. But back to the point that Becky was making regarding pushback on integrating some of these clauses into the contract, I think there is still a perception in some quarters of some industries or some companies that this is all fluffy stuff and it's kind of optional, nice to have. It is changing, probably not as quickly as we want it to, but I'm sure in a couple of years, everybody will be far more serious, and they will no longer see this as fluffy stuff, quote unquote. And you're absolutely right, Becky. To build these things up front, and it's far easier downstream. But yeah, I mean, it's usually the sales guys on the sell side and the buyers who have the need to get the incoming vendor on board. These are the people who exert pressure on, let's get this done quickly. Why is legal taking so long? Even without the ESG element, Becky, we've done many contracts for our clients. It's always perceived as a bottleneck. So take the hit up front, have all of the things built in right from the get-go, and things will be far smoother downstream.
Can I jump in there, Kerry?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sort of thinking back as you're talking there, Hemant, to a situation when I was a very junior lawyer, and I was on secondment to a big bank working on some of their trading documentation and working very closely with the trading team. And of course, the traders used to come and sort of thump your desk and say, I need this signed up now, I need to trade. And you'd say, well, look, credit lines aren't in place, can't do this, can't do that, but I will do my very best for you. And what I did is I actually kind of built up a working relationship with the traders that my part of the legal team was servicing, and said, so they knew when I said, look, I will do what I need, you need to do to get it across the line. So there's that aspect as well. And I think that can really help if you sort of say, look, this is really key. We need to get climate wording into these agreements because we've got to deliver our net zero targets. These are public targets that we're reporting on, and we need to make sure that it flows through the organization. And so that, that will take some time. But if you do that work with people and explain to them, then they know that you're not just sitting there with your heels up on your desk. So that's the thing. I also just wanted to flag as well that in terms of you mentioned, Hemant, about the differences in law. We have a project this year to make sure that we roll all of this around the globe, because although it started in the UK, it certainly isn't a UK-based project. It's a global project. And we have what we call transposition teams, or in the US we call it an adaptation team, that work with the clauses and make them relevant for those jurisdictions. And we have them in the US, we have teams in India, Ireland, which is where I live, right across, so Germany, Japan, Cayman Islands. Literally, there are lawyers all around the world who are looking at these clauses and making them relevant. And I'm also very pleased to say that LexisNexis have been adding these clauses to their agreements this is LexisNexis Legal. And hopefully, if they're in the clauses of the big, what we call precedent holders like Lexis, then they will be a sort of a very worldwide phenomenon fairly quickly. So we need to move to that new business, that new way of working, that new sort of business as usual, rather than the sort of high carbon, business as usual.
Yeah, I think that's where the, if I may, Kerry and Becky, that's where the cultural and attitudinal alignment comes into play. If you don't want a trader to come and thump on your desk that this needs, it has to be inculcated into every person in the professional in the organization that this is important stuff. We may not have a business, a few years down the road if we don't have a planet. We don't want to be doomsday pundits here, but this is very real. And unless we start acting now, and the sustainability thinking is really what. So which is why we gave a lot of importance to that. It has to come from the top. It has to be driven from the top. The philosophy, the understanding, the culture, all of that, the consciousness that we own this. It's us. You're not doing somebody else a favor. It's us. And therefore, we should not go and start putting pressure on, the ESG folks saying, get this done quickly. I think that is very key to that. And so where I'm going with this is that cultural and attitudinal alignment is very key, is as important, if not more, than grabbing the nearest ISO standard and trying to see, checking those boxes. So it's the difference between sustainability built in versus sustainability bolted on. As I keep saying, it's like they're two different things.
Marcia, I was going to ask you a question.
I was just going to say that it's all, I agree with what Becky and Hemant had said. And then there's also the kind of macroeconomic factors that put pressure on us. The inflation today, and those of us that are in the UK wake up to a headline. We're already in double-digit inflation. We have the terrible situation with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that puts pressure on energy prices. I think as citizens as well as employees, we have to help our government stay the course, and if we don't address some of the systemic issues, we don't need, or I don't think it's in the best interest of, for example, the country in which I live, the United Kingdom, to invest in a new coal-fired power station, because then we have we have more problems on the other side. So I think these are very challenging issues, and we're just going to have to really hang on and stay the course, while we try to do the right thing within our own organizations, and to use our voice as companies to advocate to do the right thing for the long term, as opposed to the short term.
That's what I'd be interested in actually asking you, Marcia. I really like this, the premise and the background to NEO's survey, which is really focused on making sure that it's an endemic philosophy within the organisation, rather than being a compliance checklist that people are ticking. That moves us away from any of the sort of like greenwashing that we've seen. How have you made it endemic within your organisation, and any hints and tips you've got for the audience on what they should do, can do, shouldn't do for their own organisations, but then also within their service provider communities and supply chains?
Well, I think if you make it where the money is, then it's going to help to drive performance. So my CFO, Nick Love, is the most senior environmental champion at RELX. Both he and our CEO, Eric Engstrom, have public goals that they have to meet, which align with our publicly stated environmental objectives. So, we're now on our third round of 5-year environmental targets, trying to reduce by 46% from a 2015 baseline. But if they're getting paid on that, you can bet that that helps to drive things forward. It also sets a good precedent as we cascade that down. I think in terms of employee engagement, well, we know our employees are passionate about these issues, but we can help them through things like green teams, which are employee-led environmental networks. Just got something in my inbox yesterday from one of our green teams asking a question. So this is really great, because this is top-down meets grassroots. But in another example is on the money side. We have a revolving credit facility that we need to maintain a good credit rating. It's a big bank overdraft. It's about $3 billion. We went out to a consortium of 20 banks, and we integrated, it's not a public KPI, but it is for those banks, and we will have to have audited results for them related to our environmental reduction targets. So again, when we can tie it up to our performance, I think that really helps to drive things very, very quickly. We're just trying to do as many things as we can think of. We've set an internal carbon price, which we'll be continuing to report on publicly in our corporate responsibility report, which this year will be integrated into our annual report. Again, a symbol of that integration. So, lots of different ways that I can think of, but we need to think of lots more as well.
Thank you for that, Becky.
Can I jump in there, because it's absolutely brilliant to actually hear someone articulate some of the things that we are advocating as well. I've just dropped a link into the chat, which I'd encourage everyone to look at. It's what we call our net zero transition map, and what that shows is how we perceive the carbon, net zero targets need to flow through a business, and the kind of practices that Marcia was just talking about there are how we see that sort of flow process working. So, for example, it starts off with a kind of question where everyone within an organisation needs to be turning around saying, to deliver our net zero targets, which we have publicly committed to, what do I need to do? This isn't about what Marcia needs to do as a Chief Sustainability Officer, but how will I do my day job differently so that I am part of delivering those targets? And I think it really does come down to, as Marcia has said, KPI. So I think if you can get that into people's KPI objectives that are set every year, but also into the employment handbooks, and by the way, we have clauses to help you do that. And if you can also get that into how you're using your financing, what your board structure looks like in terms of your governance, but then it also flows into your product lines and what you're making or your service lines, and it really does start to if you like, ripple across the organization. So everybody knows they play a part in this. This isn't just about somebody at the top saying we're going to do net zero and this is what we're going to do. It's literally all of us asking that question: what can I do today to make our targets happen? I mean, it's as simple and as complicated as you want it to be, really.
That's excellent, and that actually dovetails quite nicely into questions. So, is everyone's responsibility within the organisation? This question is really looking at how do you do it across service, your service provider community. So, if we look at Martin's question, thanks for posting the question, Martin. How do you strike the right balance contractually between one end of the spectrum, that suppliers should have ESG policies, I can't even speak, ESG policies in place and evidence those, to the other end, which is that, you're actually going to start contracting for their obligations. So is that an easy one for you to take first, Becky? But I'd love to hear Marcia's view and Hemant, if you've got one on that.
So I think what's really important as well is that in tackling the E of the ESG, we don't forget the S of the ESG. And you'll see, if you look at some of our clauses, that the wording does try and think about just transition elements. But I think it's really important that in making sure that those targets are met and in putting in place carbon abatement measures, you're not also flowing a problem down your supply chain, and you're not giving that problem to people who may not have the skills or resources to deal with that, particularly if they happen to be SMEs and may not have the resources. And what I'm very much encouraged by, if you look at some of the case studies on our website, like Vodafone is a particular example, but also Salesforce, they have been working with their supply chains. So they're not just using the opportunity to put something in their contracts that says, if you don't do what we need you to do in terms of carbon reduction, we're just going to terminate. They have a program that starts off with engagement. So we want to put this in your contract. We want to work with you. This is about you taking on some of our targets, but also us helping you to do that. So that might be, I don't know, accessing finance, it might be training events, all kinds of things. And another thing just I wanted to flag is that we will be putting out, hopefully in September, possibly in October, a set of documents that look at just transition elements when people are climate contracting, to make sure that we don't just shift problems around the world or down supply chains, that we actually tackle them where they need to, where there is the power and the influence to be able to do that, but we also do it collaboratively.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Marcia, your comment on that, please.
Well, I think rising tide lifts all boats, and the work that Becky and the Chancery Lane project is focused on is about helping everyone, just like what you're doing with NEO and Hemant and through GSA. Maybe just one shout out to wearing a hat that I wear for the UN Global Compact, and I noticed that you had the UN as one of the top association where you can get support. So the UNGC is, put a link to that in the chat function, is the business arm, if you will, of the UN. There are so many great free resources, so we can help each other, because we don't have all the answers. These are thorny issues. They're difficult to grapple with, but by talking with others, you see examples of best practice that you can consider taking into your own organization. So I'll put that into the chat function and just call out the Global Compact as yet another, really great resource.
Okay, that is excellent. Everything that's going into the chat, we will share with everybody that is registered to attend this call. So we are at time, and obviously in this digital world, we have to finish on time. But just in case anybody is still on, over to you, Hemant, for your view on how we can better manage it within our service provider community.
I think I agree with all the points that Becky and Marcia made. I think again, I tend to lean more on the soft issues because that's where things start. Education, knowledge sharing, cultural change is key. We need to drive that within our organizations and across all the organizations around us in our business ecosystem, whether they're on the buy side or on the sell side, or investors or supply chain partners or whoever. I think it's important for each organization to have its own vision, depending on which industry they're in. I mean, if you're in the fishing industry, you would see this differently. If you're in the IT industry, or if you're a bank, it impacts differently in different industries. So it's important for each organization, given their geographic footprint, given the industry presence, to develop a vision of what is appropriate for us, what are the goals we need to set, and then have side by side a whole cultural transformation and knowledge sharing initiative that runs parallel to the box checking, performative, shall we say, programs. So yeah, I would strongly advocate a harmonious blend of these two dimensions. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you all very much for joining. We don't want to make everybody late for their next meeting, so we will round up now. But thank you, Hemant, for the work that you're doing at NEO and supporting the work of the GSA here. Really appreciate it. Becky, keep up all the fantastic work. You can see the comments are really, really congratulatory and positive about the work of the Chancery project. We'll share all of that. And Marcia, again, thank you one more time for joining us and sharing, what's clearly a very mature approach, an exemplary approach to corporate ESG. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. And thank you very much, all of you, for joining. And we'll share details. Have great days. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Cheers.